And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Tesch. I'm CEO of RCN Capital. So glad you are joining us today. Well, today wraps up our series of discussions over the COVID crisis with REI Inc., a nationwide investment magazine. A big thank you to Suzanne and Robert who have put together these very insightful panels. Today's final topic is going to be successful strategies in the new reality. We're going to discuss different techniques that have emerged post-COVID, and we have a really outstanding panel today. Let's get right into it, and I'm going to start with a few introductions here. Greg Rand, Chief Strategy Officer, Renters Warehouse. Welcome aboard, Greg.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate that, Greg. Glad you're on board. Greg Godderidge, VP Operations at Radian. Greg, welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And Ryan Hennessy, CEO at Keystone Asset Management. Ryan, how are you?
Very good, Jeff. Thanks for hosting and having me on here.
Pleasure. And finally, Jason De Silva, hoping you're on board as well from ServiceLink.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Welcome aboard, Jason.
Okay, yes, I'm on board. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And once again, my name is Jeffrey Tesch, CEO of RCN Capital, nationwide lender for investment properties, short-term fix and flip, as well as long-term buy to rent. So today, what we really want to do is we want to try and consolidate all the information that we've been gathering over the last 90 days. And what we've done today is we've put together a panel of experts that can share with us what they have seen over these 90 days, what they're seeing today, and then hopefully we'll discuss a little bit some trends that we expect going forward. And Greg Rand, unfortunately, we're going to have to use last names here, although I may get inventive as we go on. Greg, I may give you a nickname as things go along, but we'll start with Greg Rand. Tell me about what's going on at your company and what you're seeing in the marketplace today.
Sure. Thanks. So Renters Warehouse, just a tiny bit of background, is a property management company. 40 markets around the country, manage about 22,000 single-family rentals for about 13,000 clients. So most of our clients have only a couple, and then we have a handful of clients, about a dozen, that have in the hundreds or a couple of thousand under management with us. They bought my company last year. My company was called Own America, and it was an online platform for folks who wanted to buy and sell portfolios of single-family rentals. So we combined the two companies into what we're hoping is going to be, a nationally recognized full-service alternative for people that want to invest in SFR. My role here is I get to be responsible to the sales side of the organization. So we have a couple of hundred real estate investment agents around the country in all of our branch offices, but I also get to develop the customer-facing technology. So I have that team that I get to lead to build the online experience for our customers. And what we're seeing is, what I'm sure everybody here, it's been an amazing, I wouldn't have chosen this, but it's been an amazing few months to see how tall single family rentals as an asset class is standing right now, how well it performs, how the rents are being paid, how it's obviously an essential thing. A place to live is essential, but also the movement, people who want to move and make, change homes, has become evident to us that that's also considered essential. We still have people renting houses for the first time. We have people moving out of houses. The transitioning of people as they live their lives through this crazy time has been really interesting. So as we go through the panel, I'll share some more, but we're feeling pretty good about the industry that we chose.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Have you seen a huge difference between, say, the beginning of April and the beginning of June from an inquiry standpoint, from the investment community? Has it been steady? Has it been increasing, decreasing? What have you been seeing, Greg?
We're seeing increases. So every curve we look at in the company, we were headed up into a good spring market. It fell off a cliff and it fought its way back to a level that's consistent with where it was probably going to be in April if things had been normal. So in the last week, like I like the question in the panel list of what's different this week, because it is a week-to-week thing, this COVID, right? Like 1 week seems like a month. So a week ago, our largest buyer clients, institutional clients who had hit pause on their acquisition programs, hit play again. And we had, a couple of hundred units go into contract last week from folks who were standing off and holding back. Those transactions went into contract very close to where they would have if this never happened, price-wise. All right, so the potential for a discount, it's almost like the housing market sat COVID out a little bit from the standpoint of valuation, because it came down and came back so fast, the consumer activity, that the housing market didn't actually have time to have an erosion of market value. So we're seeing that, and we're seeing from a tenant perspective, our whole world revolves around tenant wants to live in a place and pays the rent. Everything derives off of that, right? And the tenant activity is at a peak. We have more applications for rentals per day right now than we've ever had as a company, which is surprising. Like, we had downside scenarios forecast, and it just was really hard to. I assumed everyone was going to either not pay their rent or renew their lease and not move. What we've got is 97% of people are paying their rent, and almost as many people are moving as probably would have been at this stage. And so it's feeling like it's getting back to a reasonable normal as we speak.
Now, that's great data, and I love that 97%, because that number right there really tells the investors that are on this call today what is happening in the single family rental. And I mean, it tells you the number. If 97% of the tenants are paying their rent, there is an amazing amount of strength, and we're seeing it certainly on the lending side. We're lending to the investors that are buying off of your platform on a regular basis. And to be honest with you, the phones have never been busier than they are today, which is super surprising considering what's going on out there. Now let's pivot a little bit to you, Ryan. Ryan, from the asset management perspective, what are you seeing at your company, and maybe some up-to-date data as well, please?
Sure. So from our perspective, Keystone really handles valuation and asset disposition. We have other tangential operations that we're involved with that are obviously related to real estate, but those being the two primary focuses. Not too much on the asset disposition side has really transitioned given COVID. Obviously, the moratoriums, both in the foreclosure space and in the eviction space, have really kind of stalled some new inventory, some new inflow from the traditional client, if you will. But the logistics of moving a property onto the market and then through inevitable sale have remained fairly similar. When the COVID and really hit our area, and essentially things came to a screeching halt, there were decreases in offer activity. Most of our sales are really geared towards investors. There was probably kind of a 50-50 split on those investors that were going to kind of just circle the airport, if you will, wait to see how things shook out, and really kind of hold cash at hand depending on what maybe rent collection shortfalls there might be, while other larger investors, took that opportunity to go ahead and purchase, especially if there was limited competition now in some markets with other investors standing by. For those offers that were financed, we haven't seen too much shortfall outside of those, but those deals likely would have went under contract and were approved for financing around the start of or mid-March, I guess, around the start of the shutdown. So they were already qualified, they were already vetted, rates were locked in. What will be interesting to see going forward are any impact on financed offers for those that would have been approved during this process, with adjustments in just logistics on the lending side, same day employment verification, things of that nature. I know we're going to touch on the valuation space, so I'll kind of save some thoughts there for a few minutes, but kind of in line with what Greg had said, we haven't really seen too much shake in valuation, whether appreciation or depreciation. I think that's because we've also seen less traditional assets hit the market. The influx in renters and interest there isn't surprising. I think a lot of that might have been people that we're contemplating purchasing, but with limited availability. And from a conservative perspective, it makes sense to maybe rent and keep cash on hand rather than go with the down payment, especially if their employment situation or just geography and where they're going to live has to be flexible to plan for the future. But that's really what we're seeing as it sits today.
Yeah, no question about it. And, some of the data that we've seen, and many of you on this call have seen data coming out of auction.com. Darren Bloomquist over there is a regular contributor. I'm sure a lot of you see him on LinkedIn. If you don't, certainly hit him up. He has provided a ton of data. It's just the lack of assets coming to auction during this COVID period. And the trend doesn't look all that positive for additional assets coming anytime soon. And I think that goes back to what Greg was saying, which is the demand is there and it's greater than ever. And, Greg Godderidge, let's talk about valuation, right? What have you seen over this COVID period, and maybe opine a little bit on where you think we're going?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So certainly to echo what Greg and Ryan have already said, since the onset of the pandemic, there's been additional focus placed on our valuation. Markets are stable. BPLs are still a viable product. What we're seeing is there's been an increased discussion around aspirational pricing versus actual pricing. So reliance on the MLS, does tend to lag in your valuation. So we're seeing, the market viability and those types of things in the properties being sold. So what we're echoing and we're stating to, clients, similar to what, again, I've already said, is that it's extremely important, when determining value to sell on those properties that are sitting on the market. Right now, there's so much demand. Properties are flying off the market. We're getting, questions concerning valuations, wanting to shore up the values. So we're getting more demand for, data analytics, narrowing down into those individual neighborhood markets to really determine what is the correct value on those properties. There's been a lot of questions around job loss in certain areas for SFR, those types of things. But, overall, the asset class is performing so well. We just haven't seen really anything that's overly concerning in many of the markets. So our institutional lenders have certainly, picked up as far as, demanding values and ordering BPOs and those types of things. So again, like you said, Jeff, you guys are extremely busy. We're extremely busy in the diligence evaluation space. So overall, we're back to, more or less pre-COVID markets from what we're seeing.
Right. And that's a great point, which is the lending community at large, as well as the asset servicers, are certainly relying on folks like Radian to be able to give us values that we can feel comfortable with. Are folks using, and I use folks, whether it be lenders, asset managers, are folks using different methods today to obtain value? And how are you dealing with that on a national basis?
Yeah, so certainly we've seen a demand. Again, we have access to over 95% of the MLS through our Red Bell Valuations group, and we've seen a demand in our automated values to reconcile with our BPOs, our express values, in addition to our Radian HPI. So we recently rolled out a home price index, which has certainly been taken advantage of by many of our clients and investors. The demand is really just, again, for more data and analytics around a lot of the stuff. The home price index is something that was generated off of our automated values, which is slightly different than the other indexes out there. Other indexes are based off of recently closed transactions. Ours actually takes into account over 90 million home price estimates. So we've certainly seen a demand in those types of items, and especially our hybrid products, trying to verify the overall BPO from the agent when it comes back.
Yeah, that's good stuff. One of the other things that we've been seeing as a lender is title issues and what's going on with title and being able to execute for our customers on a rapid basis. And, Jason, I would love for you to be able to jump in and maybe talk a little bit about how title's being affected by market conditions, and maybe you could kind of take us through the pandemic a little bit from your firm and what you saw, and kind of how we've really adapted to the new reality in certain geographies across the country.
Yeah, it was interesting to say the least. From the time COVID came on, I was pretty impressed with our IT department as far as being able to basically evacuate. I'm sure you guys dealt with the same thing. From one day to the next, you're in the office, and the next day you're working from home. So it's been challenging as far as learning new technologies and learning how to collaborate as a team without being together. But we've been extremely successful thus far. We've been able to meet our projections as if COVID wasn't here. And our best performing market as of right now is the SFR and bulk transactions that we're doing. Challenges that we've had as far as title goes has been obviously county closures that we have been able to coordinate with our parent company, Fidelity, and coordinating ways to close with the county still being closed, basically. So we can still close a transaction even though the county may not be able to record your docs. So that's through a series of doing affidavits and a little bit of work on the backside. But for the most part, we're still able to close in any county, whether the county's open or not. And that's been probably the biggest change that I've seen from a title perspective.
Interesting. Maybe, is there some best practices that you could share with our community today on how folks are being able to execute these transactions, whether it be from a borrower perspective, a real estate agent, anybody in the investment space? Are there ways that some of their actions can help make sure that these deals close in a timely fashion?
I would think that from a closing standpoint, we were already invested in using the technology as far as RON and RIN. RON being remote online notaries, and with remote online notaries, basically your entire transaction as far as the notarization taking place is all done online, just kind of the same way we're doing our conference right now. So a notary would meet with you virtually, send you the docs, PDF. You guys do a session together. It's electronically notarized and sealed. And this is already common practice on several states where your entire transaction is notarized, all online, electronically sealed, and it's accepted in many states and many counties. As far as the RIN goes, RIN is a separate entity, not entity, but a separate process where you're doing remote ink signature notaries. The RON is a permanent situation where they're going to be moving forward. This is going to be the technology from now, and I see it being. I see this being a process that we'll be more and more inclined to do, especially now that COVID, we don't exactly know which way it's going to go, and if we are going to be able to eventually have notaries. I know that they're still showing up, but for the most part, I know that that's in the beginning of COVID, it was a huge burden on us as far as notaries canceling, notaries not wanting to show up. So this takes that equation out of the equation. With a RIN notary, it's a remote ink signature notary, because a lot of lenders are still not on board as far as RON goes, and it's an ongoing process. But more and more lenders are jumping on board as we get into this phase that we're into right now. With the RIN style transaction, your remote ink work signature. So docs are UPS to you or to the borrower, and they set up a online notary that does the actual visitation virtually, and that visitation then is the borrower signs those documents, gets sent back to the notary. Then the notary does their part, it puts a wet stamp on it, and then delivers it to the title company. So those is probably the two main things that I would think you would have to keep in mind moving forward, because those were challenging times in the beginning as far as notaries being able to execute their documents, not being able to execute, figuring out ways how to improvise in the stage that we're in. There's been a lot of improvisation as far as the notary section goes, and that's probably the two biggest ones. RON, like I said, is a permanent solution. RIN is only temporary. It's by executive order, and I expect those to be extended. until when COVID restrictions get slacked a little bit.
Yeah, certainly, Jason. We're seeing more and more use of these electronic notaries, and they've certainly made a difference in speeding up transactions and the ability to be able to give the customer comfort, right, when they're executing these documents. And anything that enables that really should help move the transactions along quicker. Let's switch gears for a minute and talk a little bit about kind of the results of the pandemic and signals for the investment community going forward, right? Let's talk about how we're thinking. And Greg Rand, I'm going to go back to you again. Let's talk a little bit about midterm, long-term strategy. When you're talking to your customers, especially your high volume customers, what are they signaling for the industry for not only the rest of this year, but where their mindset is going into 2021? Maybe give our audience a flavor of kind of boots on the ground, what you're hearing, Greg.
Well, we're definitely seeing this phenomenon of what I would say 2 years worth of suburban migration out of urban centers, all happening over a 4-month period. That's happening in New York right now. People who are thinking about getting out of the city are getting out quicker. People who are thinking about getting out of the Northeast and heading down to Florida are doing it. Like, I think we might see 20 years worth of migration, this glacial migration, this population trends we've been seeing for decades, coming out of higher tax, colder weather markets down to, the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, the drill, and having 20 years worth of that happening over a 2-year period. That's what we're starting to sense. And it all goes back to the big takeaway for me as I watched this whole thing play out was try to understand if the pace and severity of the recession as it set in was going to somehow be modeled or matched by the pace and the severity and the duration of the recovery on the other way out. I've been a student of this thing for a long time. In fact, I grabbed this out of the archive. I wrote this book 10 years ago, Crash Boom. And it was a study of the Great Depression to try to learn lessons of how to contend with the Great Recession. So I dusted it off when this happened, and I remembered the way this thing came about was, as typically happens, something happens and the stock market crashes. Stock market crashes, consumer confidence erodes. Businesses begin to notice that. They hold back on hiring. They begin to let people go. Unemployment goes up. Home buyers, a longer sales cycle, they start slowing down. It takes some time for the sellers to get the message and the values might come down. All of that usually takes place over 18 to 24 months, right? This time, stock market crashes on Monday and unemployment triples by like lunchtime on Wednesday, right? It happens so fast. And the question was, is a recession and a recovery, are they two chapters in the same story? And if the characteristics, I kind of think of them as like fraternal twins, right? Not identical, but they share a lot in common. And that's why we were watching closely for any signs of these V-shaped or U-shaped recovery concepts that we were all hoping for. It just seems like everything is being accelerated because of COVID. So it translates to the stock market coming back maybe faster than it otherwise would have. It translates to the housing market values maybe not even being affected because the economy bounced back before it had a chance to even affect home prices. But then it also translates into 20 years worth of migration out of New York to Florida happening over 24 months instead. So we're out ahead of those things. That's to answer your question finally. How we're changing our strategy is just being aware of the fact that we're trying to strike this balance between being cautious for a rebound and knowing that we do have to feather the gas here, right? Like there's an opportunity right now to make up for lost time by taking some risks and being aggressive right now as we see positive signs that the sun is shining again. And so we are hiring again. We've added 5 or 6 people to the company in everything ranging from sales to customer service to software development. And I could be sitting here in 3 months saying that was a huge mistake because we, didn't anticipate as big of a rebound. That's why I say we're trying to find the balance because I personally believe that the rebound is going to affect us, but we're figuring our way through this. And I'm impressed by the business community. I'm impressed by the people that I know who adapted so quickly to figuring out how to make this kind of thing happen. I'm impressed by the resilience of the people in this country who are who are just so ready to see it work again that they open the crack a little bit and a gazillion people fly through it. So we got to pull them all back again. Like, go back home again. You came out too soon, right? But it's an interesting time to test your leadership, yours and the people that you report to and the organizations that you're connected to. And I think the people that I know in business, people on this call, we're getting good marks for handling something unprecedented pretty well.
Yeah, that's well said. And to your point, you are correct. We're all figuring it out kind of as we go forward. As whether it's the leaders that are on this call today or the individual investors that are enjoying our panel today, they're trying to figure it out as we go along. And Greg, to your point, we're making decisions on what we think is going to happen. So you mentioned, we're hiring, right? You've hired a handful of folks. You've hired 5 folks because of what you expect going forward. And I think, we could use some more advice for our investors on the call today on exactly what type of risks are acceptable and how they should be looking at things. Clearly, you're bullish. From everything here at RCN that we've seen internally, we're bullish. We're not only bullish because we understand the housing numbers and the lack of supply for the demand in the single family space, but we're also bullish from just the reality of what we're dealing with every day, which is the phone ringing. And when you see that phone ringing, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing at your shop. It makes you feel like, you know what, things are moving forward and we want to be part of that. Maybe you follow up with that.
My follow-up would just be that I asked myself this question, maybe subconsciously, a year from now, if I did not recommend the risks and it turned out that we missed opportunities, am I going to beat myself up worse for that than I would have if I took a risk and it turned out to be a mistake? Yeah. So it's, you try to say, okay, if I err on one side or the other, where would I land? And we're being really cautious. I mean, listen, we understand our company better than we ever have, right? I mean, I never had to put a business through a stress test like this, where you actually see what happens if your revenues were to go down 40% out of thin air. How do you survive? Never had to do that modeling before, right? If it goes down 90%, if half the folks don't pay their rent and owners walk out the door from their management contracts, like, we understand the tolerances now. We understand what's essential and what's not, much better than we ever did. So I think we're stronger coming out of it. Not just Renters Warehouse. I think overall this country, it doesn't seem like it some days, but I feel like we're stronger coming out of this thing because we've powered through the stress test.
That's well said. And Greg Godderidge, from a services standpoint, what kind of calls are you getting? What are people interested in that maybe folks weren't thinking about before that are going to help them build their businesses going forward?
Yeah, so we've seen from when the pandemic started, we were receiving calls for, our backup services, anything from, REO, liquidation, disposition, tax payments, those types of things. And that's shifted more into our acquisition model. So, lending to Greg's point, is that we've definitely seen more of a demand in the acquisition. Going back, again, with that data and analytics, we see, more companies, our clients, wanting to acquire properties, find properties to buy. I mean, where, as you said, Jeff, there's less, inventory. They're looking for those items that fit in their buy box, and they're coming to us saying, hey, what do you have? What service can you provide? And it's really that data, driven purchasing that we can provide them. And obviously, from a, diligence standpoint, the team mainly run. We haven't really seen any change. In fact, we've actually hired additional people. We're seeing more demand for our services in that space than, at times pre-COVID. So things are moving along.
That's fantastic. And the fact that folks are thinking forward, I think, is more the same feedback that everybody on this call has been saying today. And, Ryan, what impact do you think that the REOs that are certainly going to come to market and the workflow and how all that works? Certainly on this call today, we've talked about a lack of inventory, But, from an asset management standpoint, how do you think the workflows are going to really happen going forward for the REO space in general?
Well, I think we have to take a step back for a minute and really look at what the future entails for housing and real estate as a whole. To me personally, I think we're in a situation where there's a lot of unknown variables that could drastically impact where we head collectively, not only as an industry but as a country. What I mean by that is, a lot of the folks that applied for the forbearance plan for FHA loans or any kind of loan for that matter, right? We're not at a point yet to know, once that forbearance term is up, how many individuals will default on their loan again and miss that first payment, right? So while we've seen an increase in delinquency, because technically these loans in forbearance are continuing to go delinquent by the book perspective, we don't know how that impacts foreclosure rates. As moratoriums end, potentially at the end of August, in some states, it's obviously going to vary. We don't essentially know what that will do to the mortgage servicing industry, right? On top of that, we've had more unemployment impact tenants than they have homeowners, which in theory would say that might help stabilize values. But ultimately, more, and Greg Rand, you'll have more stats on this than I certainly would, but there's more mom and pop investors that own SFR homes than there are institutional, I guess, investor owners, or at least, I guess the better way to say that is mom and pop investors own a larger portion of rentals, I guess is a more appropriate way. So with that being said, if tenants end up in a situation, maybe they're collecting unemployment with the kicker they're getting from the government, will those rents become delinquent now? And now those mom and pop investors can't really bridge that gap month to month. What happens to those types of smaller investments? So I think ultimately we're at a situation where there's too many variables to really be completely optimistic, but there's enough movement to at least not be completely pessimistic. Now, to the point of the asset management question to the REO question, a couple thoughts is, one, with the assumed spike in non-performing loans, you're going to see more investment driven towards that space. The ultimate outcome of that really depends on what that investor strategy is. Are they more opt to try and have some kind of workout with that borrower, season the loan and sell it as reperforming? Or are they more interested in the hard asset itself? And that'll really kind of help determine how much REO can be projected out of our current environment. From a bank perspective, obviously they're going through forbearance as well. They're opt to work out some more mods because they're not having to operate under FHA, directives or mandates or Fannie Freddie mandates. But as that starts to increase too, you're going to have banks taking back more assets, not to the level that you saw in 2008, plus or minus a year. More assets are backed by the government than they've ever have been, at least compared to the Depression or the recession several years ago. But nonetheless, from an asset perspective, as they come to REO, it's going to be a lot more of a strategic approach than a cookie cutter approach. Government workflow or portfolio aside, I think those that take back REO are going to be more apt to consider options for them, as opposed to putting them through kind of a straight logistical path. To kind of use an analogy, square peg, round hole, what we've seen with some sellers has been, it's regardless of what shape that asset might be, a rectangle, square, a circle, what have you, it's got to go through the same hole. It's just their process. It is what it is. I think ultimately what you'll find is more consideration with data available, with different services available, a much more strategic disposition initiative based off of data. With more assets, as I mentioned, being backed by FHA, servicers or their investors that they're servicing on behalf of have put a lot more analytics towards best execution. We hear that a lot on the sales side, but what that means on the loan foreclosure side to FHA is, should I sell it third party as part of a CWCOT auction? Should I convey it back to HUD, or should I take it back as an REO? And with a lot more data and analytics tied towards that, those assets that forego the first two options become REO. Therein lies the reason to be creative, to be strategic, to think a little bit more as an investor than they've ever have in the past, to at least try and recover from what we may encounter from a delinquency rate spike.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'd love to follow up with you on what your thoughts are on how the forbearance with the GSE loans are going to play out. Certainly, our most seasoned customers, our biggest investors that are buying not only short-term buy, fix, and sell, but longer-term rental aggregation, we're getting this question all the time, which is when these forbearances run out from the GSE sector, Fannie, Freddie, FHA, what is going to happen from an REO standpoint post foreclosure, and will that actually come to fruition? I think a lot of people are thinking, well, we're going to have some sort of a replay of 2008-9 again because of the situation we're in. And Ryan, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on how that's all going to play out going forward.
Sure. A couple points there. I don't think we'll see REO to the level that we saw it in 08, 09, really because there's alternative options that have become more popular and more, I guess, economical from a loss severity recovery perspective, like the second chance foreclosure auction CWCOT process. All of that said, I think to the first part of the question regarding the forbearance plans, what you saw from a bank perspective on portfolio loans is they took the proactive initiative to really restructure the loan term, maybe give a grace period for these 3 months, tack them on to the back end, and we'll start fresh maybe come July, this week or what have you, depending on when they applied. From the FHA government perspective, initially that was treated as a mini balloon in that basically once that forbearance period ended, the whole lump sum plus the current month would be due, which would really, be a bad thing for a lot of people that truly need some assistance and have fallen on a true hardship. What they've since have done is restructured the loan term to say that forbearance term is either due upon sale in full of your home, due upon refi, or eventually it's tacked into the end of the loan if you end up buying your house outright and no longer have debt on it. Part of the unknown is like I mentioned earlier, that delinquency rate continues to go up because these loans aren't being paid, but how much of that, transfers into the foreclosure bucket, if you will, when those forbearance periods are up. An interesting point that we're going to find ourselves in, I think, is the number of people that have equity in their houses compared to what their current loan term is. What I mean by that is the issue or the crisis that we had in 08 was really housing market driven. Values plummeted. No one had equity in their home. It created a bit of a disaster for a lot of folks. This is obviously a pandemic created by a virus. It doesn't have to do with the housing market. So a lot of values, as we talked about, are they going to appreciate, depreciate, remain stable? That's a little bit unknown, but potentially we're going to have a surge in the number of borrowers that go delinquent or that enter foreclosure that have equity in their home. Once they're delinquent, though, it might become harder to get that equity out to remain current or to use that money to apply, because getting a HELOC when you're already delinquent is really not feasible. So you're going to see a situation too where borrowers might have equity in their home, can't get it out, and are now facing delinquency and foreclosure, which from a non-predatorial standpoint opens up opportunity for investors to do research, approach these homeowners, maybe work out a strategy with them where they could convert them into renters by buying their house, and through the sale, it gives them the equity. Obviously, depending on their mortgage position, that might be a short sale or it just might be an outright sale. It's obviously circumstantial.
Interesting. And we're hearing a lot of the same thing, which is because of the nature of how the GSEs set up this forbearance plan, the likelihood of seeing a mass rush to these foreclosures are unlikely at best. And it's kept a lot of our investors extremely engaged, without a doubt. And Jason, let me kick it over to you. You know, from a ServiceLink perspective, you know, whether it's title, closing, are you seeing investors being as engaged as they had been, and maybe some best practices for really trying to move those closings along as quickly as they can, Jason?
Yeah, we have seen it being steady on the REO side. So on the REO side, as far as it's staying steady only to the inventory that's available. So the inventory that's available isn't the best inventory, so there has been a lot of legwork to do from an underwriting perspective and a curative perspective. I know that we will be experiencing a huge slowdown, because that's eventually that inventory that we do have access to from a titles perspective is going to be drying up here pretty soon, especially if these moratoriums keep on pushing forward and forward. We won't see that circle of life, like we call it, as far as an REO, a foreclosure to REO process. So from a title perspective, from an investment perspective, if I were to be an investor, just looking at it from a title-wise, some of the main issues I see with the current transactions that we're doing from a fix and flip standpoint is how an investor would do their research as far as existing fixture filings, meaning like solar panels, water treatment systems that may be on the property that you think, oh, these are out by foreclosure, and then you're up to close, and then the title company comes back and says, hey, what about the water treatment system, and what about the solar panels? The way title views those particular assets or those particular add-ons is like, yeah, technically the UCC is out by the foreclosure as to the property, but not out as is out to the actual solar panels themselves. So what I see from a hurdle from an investment standpoint is just making sure that you are aware of the two most common issues that we see today with especially with the fix and flip, is it's going to be always what we see as far as fixture filings, code violations. Code violations are extremely common with investment market, and we've been expecting a lot of delays as far as getting the inspectors to go back out there and inspect the property, whether it's COVID or whatever the case may be. Those inspections, I know that they're done more towards the end of your project. But if I was an investor and I'm purchasing a home, I noticed they have solar, it's always good to bring that up and figure out what you need to do with the title company as far as getting those issues to be resolved prior to closing.
No, that's great advice for our audience today. One of the things that we've been trying to do is get that title ordered from a lender perspective just as quickly as we can, because clearing those title issues, and this is great advice for all the investors on this call today, clearing those title issues may not be as rapid a process as you've become accustomed to pre-COVID. And addressing those issues, and Jason, you touched on this, code violations. It's not as simple as it used to be getting these code violations cleared up in many geographies, especially in the Northeast, where there are still some shutdowns in place, and we may see them pop up in other areas around the country. Great advice. Folks, we also have a question tab available as well as a chat tab. There's been some questions coming in. Feel free to click on that question bar on your screen and add some questions as time allows. Greg Godderidge, I'd love to go back to you again. You know, from a lending and borrower perspective, certainly at RCN, we've seen a tremendous uptick over the past 30 days in customer interest, especially since we were able to really backtrack on a lot of the valuation changes that we made, and the rates have come down. It's had a huge impact on what we've seen from a borrower inquiry, especially on the single family rental side. It's incredibly busy right now. Greg, maybe you could add what you're seeing from your point of view.
Yeah, certainly. There was an initial slowdown in the lending and funding space. Everyone was assessing kind of where they stood. That stress test, wanting to see how, the borrowers were going to hold up. The lenders were checking with us to make sure, certain were in line as far as those tax liens that we run a monthly process on some of our borrowers. And then from there, everyone's been, my perspective would be cautiously optimistic, right? I mean, all signs are pointing that things are going to perform very, very well moving forward, especially in the SFR asset class. We see a lot of, lenders jumping into the space. We're seeing some new players getting into the space, receiving phone calls as far as what's required for diligence. But overall, back to Ryan's point, it is certainly, very cautious, conservative at the moment, but there are a lot of discussions going on, and I expect, moving forward in 2020, we're going to see more securitizations and more, and different players coming to the table to try to get into the SFR asset class, moving away from the multifamily. To Greg's point earlier, we do see, and we are seeing a large population pushing out from the multifamily into single family, kind of getting away. I don't know if it's just the pandemic or they always planned that, but we are seeing that, in our space. So.
Yeah, no question about it. And Greg Rand, I'll let you jump in on that. But, we have seen a tremendous interest in investors that were previously just buying and taking the short money, rehabbing and selling, to a much longer strategy now and utilizing our long-term 30-year product. And I'm sure you've seen it on your end, Greg, which is customers that have made that switch in their business model or transitioned some of that switch over in their business model. How do those conversations go from your point?
They go like this. We have 13,000 doors of multifamily, and we want to go buy 2,500 single family. Or we're selling an office building in the city, and we want a 1031 exchange, and it's a single family rental. How do we do that? The answer is you buy a portfolio. One of the things that we definitely have seen is that the commercial real estate industry has been watching SFR for the better part of 10 years, and the attitude started with, it's never going to work. It wouldn't, like, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't manage a bunch of houses that are spread out, right? So anyway, years later, it's been demonstrated that it works. They're paying their coupons, their stock prices are performing. So the early pioneers of large scale SFR kind of proved the asset class out, but there was still a very slow migration of capital from other commercial asset classes into single family. And that's accelerating too now. So we get those calls every day. Prediction wise, I think you'll see an unprecedented volume of capital flowing through 1031 exchanges into single family from other asset classes, purely because they're looking at, I think it's reasonable to look at what's happening right now and think that in the next 5 years sometime, we'll get locked down again for some other reason. Like I'm sensing that politicians are going to play that card more. You're going to see storms coming. They're going to say lock down the city because there's a storm coming. You're going to get more and more of that. So when you own office real estate, retail real estate, urban real estate, this lesson is starting to show a lot of people that you want to balance that out with boring old SFR, because it's just shelter over families, the more stable part of the population, longer term tenants and everything else. But again, back to my original point a little while ago, what was going to take more years to get more traction into this space is happening much more quickly right now.
No, that's well said. So I'm going to leave your thoughts there. I'm going to grab a couple of questions. Ryan, I'm going to throw this one to you. With the comments today on the GSE loans, when do you think the foreclosures are going to be coming, which will lead to REOs? I'll toss that one to you, Ryan.
I'm sorry, there's some background noise. What was the question?
So basically the customer, the attendee on the panel today wants to know when the foreclosures start, how long until we start to see some of the REOs post forbearance?
Well, I think ultimately that really comes down to which state we're talking about here. Obviously, certain states have more of an expeditious process than others. It sounds like states like New York, and I kind of have to divide New Jersey into northern and southern, and northern Jersey, they're obviously a lot more lengthy in their foreclosure process. There's a lot more loopholes with the judicial process. They're postponing or continuing to extend moratoriums there. Some of the southern states have been a little bit more expeditious, again, with their process, 90 days plus or minus in some areas. So once forbearance plans or the forbearance program is up, depending on where that loan sits and how rapid that consumer may start to pay back, will obviously dictate the fate of the loan. What I can say is portfolio or investor-backed banks are going to, or lenders in general, are really going to follow a lot of the GSE guidelines in terms of when to start foreclosures, when to proceed, how to proceed. Really, it's just kind of if nothing else, if that's how the government wants to dictate their loans, then it's best and most compliant if we just abide by that. Private might do something completely different. Again, they're more of an investor mindset in general than a bank, who has a little bit more conservative and diversified initiatives. Once we see the moratorium lift too, I think there's going to be a lot of pickup where a lot of loans have left off. Obviously, the moratoriums don't include vacant and abandoned loans, yet there's still some conservative mindsets on how to really push those through. What we've seen also is it's a little bit county by county, in that some counties, if you can get the loan to that status, will help or push or conduct the foreclosure sale. It's really just a matter of, can you get the loan to that status? So as far as a timeline for REOs, again, there's a lot of variables, mainly depending on the loan status as it sits once moratoriums are lifted, on top of when states or where the property is or where the loan is and what their state guidelines are. I do not think we'll have a situation where we did in the crisis from a little over a decade ago, where everything's put to a grinding halt. Again, the biggest difference between circumstance is it was the housing market that really drove the recession last time. This is obviously a health and virus concern that really didn't have anything to do with the economy, consumer spend, housing, employment levels. Obviously, everything's a derivative of what we're going through now.
Great. Appreciate that feedback for the attendee. Next question. As an investor that has invested locally, I am interested in expanding out of my own area. What areas around the country are performing better in this new environment? Greg, I'm going to throw that one. Greg Rand, I'm going to throw that one to you. So this customer is certainly interested in expanding from their home base and wants to know what areas are hot right now. What are you seeing?
Well, it depends, of course, on what the goal is, right? I mean, the investor, not all investors are the same. Everybody's got a different set of priorities. The way I usually answer this question, I get it quite a bit of, I live someplace where either I've already invested or I'm in Connecticut, there's no yields to be had where I am, where should I go? My question is usually, what other places in the country are you familiar with? Meaning, like, I grew up here, but I went to college there, or I used to go on vacation there as a kid. My parents lived there. There are places that are secondary markets in your life, all right? You live in your primary, but there are other ones that you have a familiarity with. Yeah, that's where I would start, because if you're, again, I don't know what your yield requirements are. I don't know if you're buying, small investors are interesting. You ask them what their goals are, they say, I want to retire with $1 million. Like, that's sometimes the kind of goal that we hear. $1 million in real estate equity and 50 grand a month, 50 grand a year in free and clear income. Their goals are not a 6.19742% net yield. Like, it's not the same thing. So I love the idea of looking around and trying to find another place that, because if your parents live there, you're going to be aware if a hurricane is coming. Because you go on vacation there every year, you have the chance to go surveil your own property when you head down there. Like, so there's, because you have family there, you've got familiarity of what's happening in the market, some eyes and ears on the ground, that sort of thing. And then as you sort that out, I mean, there's resources for free online now where you can go and figure out what kind of prices are you going to be able to get, what kind of rents can you get, what kind of returns on investment you can get in each of those places and choose from there.
No, that's well said, well said. And it's a question that we get all the time as well, Greg. You know, especially with investors from California, we get that question all the time. Is, you know, the return, the ROI on an investment in California, where they could head to Dallas or Vegas or wherever, any ancillary markets to California, and it's happening on a regular basis. I love the idea about being a secondary market that you already know. That's well said. We're coming up on the top of the hour here. I just want to be able to give each of the panelists here just a minute or so to be able to talk about, you know, how they're going to be moving forward as a company, and just what they see from a customer's perspective. So try and keep it short. Jason, I'll start with you.
Yeah, moving forward, I mean, we have the ability to bring our staff back into the office, but obviously we're not going to be doing that as an abundance of caution. We want to eliminate any causes that may interfere with the closing of a transaction. So we're going to eliminate that factor. Moving forward, as far as a customer perspective, this particular market, we have been paying attention to it for a very long time. From a title perspective, we see it as an underserved market. We've been developing different processes to customize, because every single client within the SFR or bulk transaction has unique requirements that we have been able to accommodate through a series of just reaching out and calling the same way we're doing right now, and figuring out what challenges they have from a title perspective, and customizing our transactions on the title end to better serve this market.
Appreciate that. Ryan, please jump in.
Sure. Just on kind of the personal side of the business too, obviously, you know, we can kind of see from everybody here, you know, we're all at a remote, you know, operation. We're going to keep our staff remote likely through the most, if not all, the summer here. Looks like Jeff, Greg, you guys have stricter dress codes at home than I do there. But, you know, on the business side and the development side there, you know, what we've really done to gear up towards for the future, for lack of a better term, is really kind of revamp a lot of our workflow to make sure that we're pliable, adaptable to a much more strategic initiative for our sellers. Make sure that we're uncovering more opportunity in how you sell assets. Again, working more with the sellers than buyers. You know, coming to them with kind of a stronger aggregation of data to really make the best decision for the property. I know that's been an initiative in the past, but now a lot of folks that might not have been as, you know, willing to consider strategy diversification have come to us really requesting, you know, hey, we really want to expose all opportunities on properties here and make the best decision, not only based off the property, but what's known about, you know, some of the advancements and the loan status there. So that's really been a focus there, and push for more analytics and support in that late stage default foreclosure sale initiative, and helping folks determine what ultimately is best execution beyond just providing different valuation and analytic tools.
Appreciate that, Ryan. Greg Godderidge. You're on mute, Greg.
There we go. The computer's not the phone. So moving forward, as we come together as one Radian, we have you know, several companies that were acquired and came together as Radian. You know, we've recently formed the Radian Real Estate Management. In that platform, we're developing different products for the SFR customers. One of them is which is a platform to help with the buying and selling and the diligence that we perform. So, and in effort, you know, we're continually developing and looking at different ways to use, you know, the partnerships that we have both in-house and outside the company to develop new, you know, technology-based systems.
Appreciate that. And finally, Greg Rand, please.
I'll just highlight Build for Rent. We've got a major strategy initiative. Everybody loves new homes. The tenants love them. The investors love them. They aid in people being able to invest outside of their home-based market because the concern about condition goes out the window. So I think you're going to see a substantial portion of new homes being bought by investors in perpetuity.
Well said. And, finally, I'll just jump in and say, certainly our goals here at RCN have been to service the customer through this pandemic and take them out on the other side so that many of the opportunities that we talked about today are achievable. We've been really proud that we've been able to do that. And we're optimistic about the single family housing market from an investment standpoint going forward. With that said, a big thank you to Jason, Ryan, Greg. You guys have been awesome panelists today. Tons of information. You folks truly are the experts in each of your spaces, and it really showed today. Finally, a big thank you to REI Inc., who has sponsored and put together this series of panels over the past 90 days. Suzanne and Robert really came to me and asked if I would help facilitate these panels over the past few months to get information out to the investment community across the United States. And it has been my true honor and privilege to be able to do that. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing all of you in person on the road here in the fall with any luck. It's been quite a journey. So thanks to everybody again, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.